The Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me because he was before me.'" From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you.
Please be seated. Well, as Pastor Rachel said, this is the 12th day of Christmas. So here it is, just a quick pop quiz. In this song, 12 Days of Christmas, what is given on the 12th day? Yes. Sorry. Was it? I mean, of course, I did not know that. I thought it was Lord's Leaping. You thought it was Lord's Leaping too? Day 10? We were so close. Okay, another pop quiz. What are the two Gospels that do not have a Christmas story in them? Yeah, Mark and John. And so we end the Christmas season with a Gospel story from one of the Gospels that doesn't have the Christmas story. I think that's fascinating. But it's wild that there is one word in today's Gospel that I think sums up what Christmas is all about. It's a fascinating word. Unfortunately, the English translation doesn't do it justice. But in the 14th chapter of John 1, the Word became flesh and lived among us. And if you're of my generation, you would have said dwelt. Okay? The Word became flesh and lived among us. The Greek word actually means pitched a tent. I am shameless, but you knew that. The Word became flesh and pitched a tent among us. Now, I was playing around with that image, and you play around with it as well. But as I was thinking about, I agree, about pitching a tent. Who has ever put up a tent? Who has ever had trouble putting up a tent? So God comes and pitches a tent. And so, I mean, I did a pretty good job. I hadn't put this tent up in quite a while. But actually, who has ever put up a canvas tent? Oh, Lord, my hat is off to you all. I mean, were those easy to do? No. So God comes. It's not an easy proposition. Necessarily pitch a tent. So the incarnation, not necessarily an easy kind of a thing. One good thing about a tent, one of the good things, is it moves around. It can be with different people in different places. The Word became flesh and pitched a tent. you're also closer to everything than in a house. I mean, how thick is that floor? I mean, it may be made out of ripstop nylon, strong, but you're right there. Or how about the walls? Have you ever tented next to somebody else? Do you know exactly what they are doing and what they are talking about? And don't you wish they would just go to sleep? I mean, you are close. The Word became flesh and pitched a tent. In a tent, you're also vulnerable. Ripstop nylon notwithstanding, you are more vulnerable to the elements. You're more vulnerable to people. You are simply more vulnerable. Let me tell you a story. This was in the summer of 1979, and Gay and I are on our first vacation after I was ordained, and we are in Smoky Mountain National Park. Gorgeous. There are rules in the park. One of those rules is that you are to cook your dinner, eat, and wash your dishes before dusk. Well, thank you very much. Why?
Bears.
Yes, my people. There are bears. And so, Gay, she's a good rule follower. I try. So we've done that. Everything's done. It's all cleaned up. It's just fine. We're probably playing Scrabble on the picnic table. The people next campsite over, it's dusk. They drive in. They've been boating all day long. Their boat is behind their truck. They all get out. And what do? They're going to make dinner. And so they get the fire going. They get the frying pan out. And they are going to fry chicken. And so Gay and I, we decided it's time to go to bed. We're in the tent. We're in the sleeping bags. And then the commotion started. Bear! There's a bear! We look out not this one, it was a smaller one, our ripstop nylon tent. And sure enough, there was a bear in their campsite, black bear, nosing around and nosing against their cooler. One of the guys in that camp decides to do something absolutely amazing. Kicks the cooler into the bear's nose. You thought that was a good idea? Towards thankfully, the bear had more sense than any of those people. And so he left going through our campsite, we with our ripstop nylon tent, being very safe, and decided to go somewhere else to find a meal. The Word became flesh and tented among us. When God comes to us, God decides to come in a vulnerable way. Doesn't go into a big mansion, doesn't go into a palace, doesn't go into a fort. The Word became flesh and tented among us, to travel with us, to be vulnerable to us, even in a world where there are so many people who think the rules don't apply to them. in a world where a lot of people make bad choices in so many ways, the Word became flesh and becomes vulnerable to it all. We love that. Amen?
Amen.
And yet, it is so difficult for us to follow. We have a very spotty record as a church in following the vulnerable God, because we prefer security over risk. We prefer power over vulnerability. It's so much easier to set up a wall than open a door. And we've done this as the church throughout the millennia. The Crusades, the Inquisition. How about slavery? How about oppressing minority groups of racial or sexual or gender identities? We, have a spotty record in following the God who becomes vulnerable with compassion, care to us all. So it's spotty, but it's not all. We do have our better moments, don't we? Amen to that? We have our better moments where we are vulnerable, where we open ourselves to others, where this compassion can be shared and life can be given and received. Along this line, let me just tell you a story. And this was told by Sylvia Stauffer Aiken about when she was growing up, and it was Christmas Day, and it was just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. She tells this story, that she and her family were Methodists, and they were coming from Christmas Day service. There was a light drizzle, but it was time to go home and play with the presents that Santa had left. And so they're running home, she and her sister, and they're huddling under the awning, this family. Mom, dad, 2 daughters, and a son. So they're huddling there waiting for the bus. But so she notices them, but she runs on because you know what she wants to do? Get to those toys. And so they get home, and they're baby sisters as well, but the 2 older daughters are running. And they get to the presents, and they're just enjoying themselves so much. But soon it is time to go to Grandma's, because it's time for family to get together and have Christmas dinner, and so that's what they do. And they don't say it, shouldn't say it in the story, but it's got to be. Do you remember those big boats that they called station wagons? I mean, they could put in both the offense and the defense of a football team. They were amazingly big. So I think that's the kind of a car. Anyway, they all pile in the car, and they're going to head off to Grandma's, and it's going to take them right by that gas station. And the family is still there. They get on the highway. And Sylvia recognizes that they aren't traveling very fast. And as they go along, they're going slower and slower. Finally, her dad says, "I just can't stand it!" Stops the car, turns around. It's Christmas Day. And that family is stuck outside that gas station. So he drives up, they stop, rolls down the window, doesn't do this, but rolls, different age, rolls down the window and says, You're waiting for the bus? Yeah, it's not going to be here for a long time. So I'm going to take you to Winborn, which was a little town close by. I'm going to take you to Winborn. If you get in, I'll take you to Winborn. There's a shelter and a bench. They talk it over. Okay, so that's risk. Take it over on both sides. They get into the car. So the dad, then he looks back to the kids. He says, did Santa come? Did Santa come? Just by their looks, he knew that they hadn't gotten anything. And so what he did, he said, you know, when Santa stopped at our house, he said that he couldn't find you guys. And so he was going to leave your presents with us. And so they drove back to their house. They went into the house, and one of the girls picked Sylvia's doll. The boy got a ball. And Sylvia says she doesn't remember what the other child got, but the mom also saw that one of the little girls just had on one of those really thin dresses, just so thin. And so she gave her a sweater. Now they tried to talk him into, hey, come with Grandma. We got plenty of food. But they weren't going to do that. They said, we got the bus to catch because they were going down to Birmingham because the guy was promised a job. So they took him to Winborn. They got out, and then the dad took out his wallet, and he had $2 in it. Remember, this is 1949. He had $2, and so he said that was the last money he had until payday. But he said, here, you take this. Because your kids are going to be hungry when they get to Birmingham. And I know what it's like to be broke. Sylvia says that was the Christmas where she and her sisters learned the joy of making somebody happy. Being vulnerable, opening oneself, not condemning, but compassion, not security, but risk, not staying behind a closed door, but opening it. I think that is what we are called to do by this Jesus who becomes flesh and pitches a tent, being vulnerable to all of us, to our world, that we may know God's own compassion, and that we may then take the risk to share it ourselves. Merry Christmas.